Welcome to the Alaskaland podcast, stories from the Fairbanks North Star boroughs past, present, and future, with your host, Mayor Bryce Ward. Each episode, we'll sit down with Fairbanks' most interesting characters for a fascinating conversation about where we've been and where we're going. And now, Mayor Ward.
Well, hello, everyone. It's the Alaskaland podcast. We're here talking the past, present, future of the Fairbanks North Star Borough. And today we have a very special guest. Today we are talking about the SS Nenana, and we have Miss Patricia Schmidt. Patricia, it's welcome on the podcast. I'm glad to have you here. And I'm super excited to talk about the Nenana and the history and then what we're doing about it right now.
Yes. I'm excited.
So let's maybe talk a little bit about the Nenana and how this particular vessel made its way into the park and the history. What ties it to Fairbanks?
Okay. It was brought here in 1957. A group of businessmen that had purchased it to try to get tourists to come to Fairbanks. So it came 1957, but it had a long history before that. It started out in 1931 when the Alaska Railroad needed a bigger boat. They had two small ones. They needed a bigger boat, and it was commissioned to be built in 1931. It was prefabricated in Seattle, Washington, and shipped up on steamers in parts. And then it went on the Alaska Railroad to Nenana, 450 miles, and was actually assembled in Nenana. And it was named after the town it was built in. It was actually called the Nenana of Nenana.
Really? So, it's amazing to think that entire vessel was prefabricated, hauled up here, and then assembled on site.
And that they did this in 1931. We thought that our current future, that where we are now, that we know how to do things like that. We do that now. Well, they did this in 1931, which is pretty amazing. It was all prefabricated and shipped up in pieces.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was built in 31, mm-hmm. And then it operated on the river for a couple decades. Is that right?
Yeah, actually it was built in 32.
32, okay.
And launched in 33. Let me double check here. Yeah, that's correct. And it was mainly a packet boat, meaning it would haul cargo and passengers. It mainly hauled cargo, though. It didn't haul very many passengers. It wasn't a fancy boat. It was made for getting it done,
And it is certainly big. You think about the amount of cargo that could be hauled on that
mm-hmm.
Particular boat, and then the amount of goods and how far it moved those
mm-hmm.
goods. I mean, this was the highway of the 1930s, right?
Right. It ran every 2 weeks. It would run from Nenana to Marshall every 2 weeks, and it ran 24 hours a day. And when it got dusky, if it got too dark, they had a huge spotlight on the top of the pilot house that they would use. But it ran all the time, And
so from breakup till freeze up.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it would freeze up off on the river, and they would take it off onto a slough and try to keep it protected. And they'd go in there before breakup and thaw out the water and get it ready to get out on the Yukon. Once the Yukon was thawed out and they could travel, and they'd get back to Nenana and get ready for the season again. Yeah,
I imagine it would be pretty dangerous to leave a riverboat on the river for breakup.
And that's how they lost many of them, because during breakup, it would destroy the boat. And they lost one of their previous boats, smaller boats that way. So it happened a lot.
Wow. So the Nenana operated for about 20 years, and it had a handful of captains, right?
There were only three. And the first captain was Charles Adams, and he captained the boat for 14 years. And they made him retire when he was 65, which he was not happy about. He did go on to captain other ships or boats after that. And then there was Earl Weir, who only captained it for 1 year. And then Howard Adams, who was the nephew of Charles, ran it for the remainder of its life. He ran it until 1949 as a passenger service boat, and then they ran it only as cargo, and he ran it to 1954. And that was kind of, it was no longer profitable for the railroad, and they stopped running it after 1954, even as a cargo boat.
So a little nuance that you just mentioned there, and you said this earlier, the boat was owned by the railroad. That
Yes.
seems kind of odd
Yes.
to us maybe nowadays.
Right.
But can you maybe explain a little bit about that connection to the rail system?
Well, when they finished the railroad in 1923 to Nenana, the railroad needed a way to get their supplies to the villages and the outskirts there. That's where they made a lot of their money, hauling all that stuff up. So they actually acquired 2 boats from the Army that was originally belonged to the Army, and they were running those. And it was 1931 when these boats were no longer efficient or big enough, and they commissioned the Nenana to be built as one large boat. So it was owned by the railroad that whole time.
That's fascinating.
It is.
It's really neat.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the boat could haul quite a bit too. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of tons.
Tons. 300 tons of cargo on the cargo deck in the hold, and it could push up to 6 barges on the Yukon, packed full. But on the Tanana River, it could only push 1 to 2 because it was much more winding and they couldn't turn it. But yeah, at 300 tons on the boat. And then it had, massive cords of wood stacked on the front because it would burn a cord of wood an hour. And then they also had to pack coal on it because the engines were run by coal. So it carried a lot. It could hold up to 50 passengers, but they generally traveled with not more than 24. But it could hold up to 50 passengers.
My goodness. So 6 barges. How, do they just hook them up in a big line, or?
Yes, and it's the hogging system that turns it. It actually hooked onto the front of the winch, and when they could actually turn these barges around corners in front of them, they could. With it is. It's
that is amazing.
I had to research that one because, how do you do that, But they did. They used that winch to actually turn those boats with the hogging system on the barges, and they were all connected.
Yeah, you'd have to, because I'm just thinking of the Chena, I'm thinking of the Tanana, and you're not gonna. It's not a straight shot by any means.
That wind. Yes.
Yeah, it might be 10 miles by air and 100 miles by river.
Right.
That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but definitely.
Yeah, and the engines on the Nenana, they were locomotive engines, a single stacked Sternwheeler with a high-low pressure twin compound condensing steam engine, and it would burn up to a cord of wood an hour. In 1948, they switched the engines over to oil burning, and it was the most advanced system of the time. And the boat was so quiet, the captain couldn't tell if the engines were running unless up in the pilot house, unless he turned to see if the wheel was turning. It was that quiet. And the villages couldn't hear it coming. And they used to blow the whistle. In the first season when they first came out, they blow the whistle so that the villages knew they were coming because you couldn't hear it. And they always carried a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables to give out to the villages, especially the children, at the beginning of the season coming through. So everybody was looking for that Nenana at the beginning of the season. They were all excited, to get that fresh fruit, something that they didn't get.
And it's they had refrigeration on.
They had a refrigeration in a cargo deck across from the mess hall. They had the for the crew their mess hall there, and they had the cooks and the dishwashers, and they actually had a section for the bakery, and they had women on the boat that were in the bakery. And they used coal to operate their ovens and stoves, which I thought was pretty interesting. It took me a while to find that one out. They were operated by coal.
And so you had mentioned a cord an hour. These things ran 24 hours a day during the summer when they were out moving materials. Mm-hmm. That's a tremendous amount of fuel.
Absolutely. They would, about every 50 miles, there would be a station for them to stop at with cords and cords of wood stacked to resupply the boat. And the person would I think it was the person, the year ahead, they would contract with people on the river to cut wood. And they would be cutting wood all year for that next season. So they knew where they were going to stop. And they were generally about every 50 miles. before they had to resupply, and they had to resupply often.
So how, maybe this is a question you don't know the answer to, but how long did it take to restock? I mean, I would imagine that, I know how long it takes me to stack a cord of wood.
They were pretty quick.
It's certainly not a short amount of time.
They were pretty quick. This is a guess, but it would be, I'm sure, less than an hour. There's the archives have videos of them stacking the wood, and two guys, one of the guys in the front holding it like this, and the other guy dragging, trying to keep it from going down and getting it to the boat. Guy in the front would take off running so that he wouldn't be run over. And I'm sure there were times that thing kept going and the wood went to the other side. There's no video of that, but they were quick. They were quick. And there was a whole crew that got off the boat and was stacking. So I'm sure less than an hour. Sometimes they would let the passengers get off and let them watch, but that's a good question for me to research.
Yeah, that's crazy. We think we go through a lot of wood now. Sounds like back then it was even a greater amount.
Massive amounts.
And so you had mentioned that the engines were so quiet. Is this whether it was wood or oil, or just in general they were just quiet engines?
Quiet in general because of the condensing of the steam.
Okay.
That ran back up, and they would reuse it.
Oh, it's a closed loop system.
Right, and they would reuse it, so it was a very quiet system.
Gotcha. So it wasn't like the old steam engines.
Yeah. You could not hear them coming. It was so quiet.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it sounds like 1954 was kind of the end of the steam era, if you will, or the time at which the boat was operating. So the Nenana was actually docked here in town.
The railroad, losing money, pulled the Nenana from service in 1954, and they put it up for bids in 1955. And it was 57 that it was the Fairbanks businessmen formed the Greater Fairbanks Opportunities Incorporated, an offshoot of the Chamber of Commerce, and they purchased it to bring it to Fairbanks as a tourist attraction, to try to bring more tourists into Fairbanks. And Captain Adams, Howard Adams, is the one that brought it from Nenana to Fairbanks. It was actually the last time those engines turned the wheel. So it was kind of a sad thing, but yeah.
So prior to that, it was actually, was it living in Nenana?
Yes, and it actually, it was leased out for 1 year to somebody that had barges in Nenana, but it wasn't profitable for him either. So he said, that's not going to work. And that's when the railroad put it up for sale. And they had a lot of bids that it just wasn't enough. They had just had it refurbished in Canada the year before, and it wintered over there and was completely refurbished. And I can't remember, it was like $127,000. I'm not sure exactly, but they spent a lot of money refurbishing it. So it was basically getting a new boat. So the people from Fairbanks came up with enough money, and that's how they brought it here. And when they were bringing it through the Chena, it was so wide that it actually almost touched bank to bank on either side in some places on the river. The boat was so big.
Oh, wow. And it came to Fairbanks, and then it sat here, right? So the business opportunity unfortunately didn't go anywhere.
It didn't go well. It was sat at the very end of where 1st and 2nd Avenue kind of meet, just before you get to the old power plant, city power plant. And it sat there, and it wasn't really used. It wasn't used in the wintertime. They would do some shows and stuff for tourists on it, and now and then they would use it for housing when hotels were full. They'd use it as a hotel, but it just didn't do well, not as well as they had hoped. It didn't make the money that they'd hoped. So it was a failing adventure for the group.
So then another life emerged for the Nenana.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what happened next.
Well, this group was really happy when they wanted to open up Centennial Park, because they could get rid of the boat. And they actually gave it to Centennial Park, and they were to get the proceeds after the first year or two, and they would figure that they'd recoup their money that they'd put into it. So in 1965, it was 2 miles from where it was sitting. They floated it down. They had dug out a canal, and they floated it down in 1965 and brought it into the park and put it in the pond man-made pond that they had built to put her in. So it was the first actual structure that was brought into the park in 1965. And unfortunately, what they did to it, though, is took out all the staterooms and the salon where they ate and all that, and they gutted it and turned it into a restaurant. And upstairs where all the crew's quarters were, that was all gutted, and it was another area for exclusive members and stuff. But it was damaged. It caused great damage to the boat, because it wasn't meant to be open year-round, and there was moisture building up in the walls. So,
interesting.
Yeah. And hoping to save it, they built the roof on the top on the different levels. Well, that caused even more damage because it was too heavy, and then there was the snow load, and it was actually almost splitting the boat right down the middle. It was stored back to the original configuration from 1986 to 1992 by the Fairbanks Historical Preservation Foundation, which was a nonprofit organization, public organization. They reinstalled all the staterooms and got everything back to how it was originally configured, and they did a beautiful job. It's all been documented, and there's videos and pictures, and it was pretty amazing what they did.
Gotcha. So the remodel, the kitchen remodel and restaurant remodel was turned around, and back in the 80s, that was all put back in. So what you see today is how it was originally configured.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. So 1986 was was the first major restoration. Mm-hmm. There's since been another smaller restoration, and then now we're at another. So maybe let's talk a little bit about what's happened in those years preceding 86.
Yeah, well, there was over the years, declining years, the maintenance was being deferred, and the boat became a little neglected. There was beginning damage and deterioration took its toll. There, 2011, there was some repair of some of that damage that was happening, but slowly the Bureau was closing off the different levels, top levels of the boat, and only the cargo deck was open. And in 2018, it was deemed unsafe, even on the cargo deck. So the boat was closed completely. And at the time, there was talk of maybe even dismantling the boat. Mm-hmm. We had just lost the Masonic Temple, so the thought of losing the Nenana for the historians of Fairbanks in the community was, no, it can't happen. So the community got together and formed the Friends of SS Nenana to try and save and restore the boat, working as an independent and working with the borough.
So you mentioned a little bit about the Friends of the SS Nenana, and I would say that's a pretty critical group and pivotal group to the project that's happening now, mm-hmm. And the efforts to kind of coalesce the community behind the SS Nenana. Mm-hmm. Maybe, do you want to take a few minutes to talk about the group and how folks could be, how you could get more information or maybe mm-hmm. become a member? Mm-hmm. What does that look like?
We're actually sponsored by the North Star Community Foundation. They're our sponsor. We work under their 501c3. And we do have a web page. We have 2 Facebook pages, and one's a group page where people can talk and share, and one's a business page. And whenever we get updates from the Bureau, and we're working really good one-on-one with the Bureau, because the public is really connected to the Friends, and they come to us for updates. What's happening? What are you guys doing? So we're really grateful that the Bureau is keeping us up to date with what's happening, so that we can keep the public updated. And we share also this information with other associations, with Sternwheelers in the lower 48. So we're able to really keep the Nenana up front, and people listen to us.
That's great. And are you a membership organization, or how does that work if someone wants to be a friend?
Well, right now, because of COVID, we had to change what we were doing, but you can join the Facebook group. The main thing is we still take donations. We still are raising funds for restoring. We have a grant that we're working on now to restore the boat, but we continue to take donations for the restoration of the Nenana, and we're doing pretty good on that. So. By people joining our page where they can get this information on the group page for Facebook, that's how they get more information on doing donations. And I think after COVID, when we're able to start a membership, we'll be able to do people joining for money. But right now, it's just not possible.
So if folks are interested in becoming a friend, just look up SS Nenana on Facebook, or what's the name of the group?
It's Friends of SS Nenana.
Friends of SS Nenana.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's our webpage and everything. So we just keep it real simple.
Keep it simple.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So right now there's a project that we have in the Capital Improvement Program.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of our present and future discussion on the SS Nenana. And I know you have been working really closely with staff on that particular project. The idea is we want to get the boat open again.
Right.
We want to get the public in there, enjoying the dioramas, to just enjoy the history. I can remember climbing around all sorts of aspects of the boat when I was a kid, and I'd love to get back to that point again.
Yeah.
So we've got that project that's happening, and then we also have the next phase, which is in the out years, or it's in future years for the Capital Improvement Program, to do the full restoration. So the plan is within the next decade or less,
mm-hmm.
preferably less, that we get that thing back up in tip-top shape.
Right.
Maybe do you want to mention anything that you're working on as far as activities or things that you would hope to be doing in the future with the boat when it's open to the public?
We've actually got a plan that we can put together on the best way for the Nenana to make money once she's open again, so she's more self-sufficient. And that's something we're working on. What would the best way to do that? What would the plan be? We're looking at, after the restoration and the cargo deck, there's really no plans of immediate moving on to the other levels of the upper decks. We're hoping to pick up that slack and start moving before 10 years with the grants that we're able to get. And because we have a lot of experience behind us from people from the past restoration that are working with us, that have the knowledge of how to do this. And so we're really happy they're working with us too.
And I'll say there's some great documentaries out there. I think there was one that you shared with me that I was able to watch that mm-hmm. talked about that 1980s, 86 to 89 restoration project and the work that they did. And it was really just awesome to see the video that they had captured of that restoration.
And what it can be.
Yeah,
right,
it was truly a community event, you could tell.
Yes.
At that time.
Yes.
So, well, Patricia, thanks a lot for spending some time with us today to talk about the SS Nenana, the things that the Friends of the Nenana are doing, a little bit about the history of this particular vessel and how it ended up in the middle of Fairbanks.
Right. Yes. Yes.
But do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to share with listeners?
A lot of things that people don't realize on the captains. The first captain, Charles Adams, was also the captain of the Lavelle that brought Barnett to Fairbanks and dropped him off on the banks of the Chena. So he kind of has two distinctions. He was not just a boat captain. It was because of him that we're sitting here talking today. Why Fairbanks is here. The captain that was also. This is another thing. This is his book that was written from his journals that he had when he first actually came here as a gold miner. And it works into getting the Lavelle, and it tells the whole story of with Barnett and everything, going on to being captain of the SS Nenana and having to retire when he was 65. He didn't like that. But this, you can still find it on Amazon. It's not currently being published. We're hoping to be able to get this published again. We're also working on a book on the history of SS Nenana that we're currently working on writing right now, that we hope to have in the near future, have it available to the public.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Tricia, thank you so much for spending some time today.
Yeah.
And I wish you the best of luck with the Friends of the Nenana, and very thankful for the work that you're doing here in the community.
Yeah, and we're grateful for the community support. Without them, we wouldn't have gotten this far, and they've saved that boat more than once. So it's because of them, so we're grateful for the community.
That's great. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and till next time, we'll talk to you later.
Fairbanks, oh Fairbanks.
Thanks for listening to the Alaskaland podcast. We hope you found today's conversation enlightening. For more episodes, listen on your mobile device through your favorite podcast app or watch at youtube.com/Fairbanks North Star Borough.